In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America. Welcome to a special edition of the Corporate Couch. These episodes will be more of a love seat that focuses on one topic and will run 15 to 30 minutes. For each special edition episode, you will hear from one or more outstanding leaders sharing their expertise on the most important challenges in corporate America today. Welcome to another special edition of the Corporate Couch. We're doing the book edition, part two. My co-host today is Sean Kincaid, the founder, CEO of Spire Business Development.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, our first book edition was the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. Today we're doing another excellent book, James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habit. Yeah, very excited about that. Sean, Atomic Habits, did you read it when it first came out, and how did you find out about it?
I don't remember if it was when it first came out, but it was definitely pretty quickly after it came out. As I got into coaching, one of the things I recognized was that everything we do is all about human behavior, right? I mean, it's a behavioral thing.
Yeah.
And so whether that's, growing a better business or getting healthier or whatever, they all tie back to behavior. And so I always keep my eye out for something that ties into that topic. And ultimately, this is probably the best book maybe I've ever read relative to behavioral stuff that's practical. I mean, there's other great books out there too, but this one really jumped out at me. And after I read it, I was like, wow, this really has a lot of impact on a lot of things. I think I probably just stumbled across it shortly after it came out and people were talking about it.
I know it came out in August of 19 because I went back to look, or 18, I'm sorry. But it looked like, I went back to my emails and it looked like I subscribed to his newsletter.
Yeah.
Before that, because I had one of the newsletters. My book's coming out, August 2018.
Right.
I first came up with the concept of getting 1% better every day. I had read about that. Are you familiar with James Altucher?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so he's a crazy New Yorker and he's very transparent, and he wrote the book Choose Yourself that a friend of mine turned me on to in like 2014. And he was the first one that not came up with, but when I first heard, if you get 1% better every day, at the end of the year, you're about 38% better.
Right.
And I was like, that made a lot of sense to me. And then when this book came out and I finally read it, I love it because, he said, right in the beginning, besides his crazy story, high school, getting,
right.
getting a bat basically thrown at him, not accidentally, and, almost dying and crazy stuff happening. But, like everybody has the same goal. If you're a sports team, your goal is to win the championship. So everybody has the same goal. So it's not about goals.
Right.
It's about your process and your systems to get to the goals. And I just really, really embrace that, so your goal is, your goal may be to lose 20 pounds or gain.
Which again probably applies to almost everyone, right? I mean,
Right,
that is
right.
a lot of people's goals,
Right. Or, improve your bench press,
Right.
from, 175 to 225, whatever it is. And what is the process to do that? So I just thought there's so many good things in it. I mean, were the things that you actually implemented for yourself or your clients based on the book?
Yeah. It's I was thinking about that a little bit as I was preparing for this. I mean, one of them that's kind of stupid is maybe you've had this experience. You go to the dentist, and every time I would go to the dentist, they're like, "Oh, are you flossing?" Well, yeah, I have flossed sometime in my life. Yes. Are you flossing regularly? No, probably not.
Right,
And
right.
so when I read this book, I'm like, I think I had just gone to the dentist recently. I'm like, that's really stupid. I ought to be able to floss regularly. And so
Yes.
the idea of habit stacking, so basically I brush my teeth every night. I There's no reason why I can't just slip in the idea of flossing just as part of that overall process of getting ready for bed. And sure enough, it actually made that fairly easy to adopt.
Yes.
So that was one of the things that I took away. I think another one was just the idea of I'm not really the kind of guy that loves to go to the gym. I don't mind, but it's not something I love. But the idea of being able to listen to books, which I do love doing, and tying that to if I either go to the gym or I go walk or whatever. So combining those two things together, which is another thing that he recommends
Yep.
uh, as a way to start a new habit. That was something else that now when I walk or when I go to the gym, I'm always listening to a book, and I actually look forward to it.
Yeah.
It's something for me, so it gets me out there.
Ramit Sethi, he wrote "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." It's kind of a cheesy title,
Yep.
but it actually has really good financial advice. So he's kind of the, I'll say, financial guru for younger generations.
Yep.
And he has, I know he had a Netflix series about that. He would have actual couples and people on the show showing him,
Right.
kind of financially. But he was the first one that, like, habits. He would say, just go to the gym. You don't have to work out, but I want you five
Just
times a
show up.
week, just go to
Yep.
the gym and come home, you know,
Yeah.
and you just get in the habit of doing it. And, James Clear does the same thing in the book. I think he says, work out for 5 minutes,
Yep.
and the other thing that I've implemented when I want to set different goals for myself is I like, don't break the chain. So that, Jerry Seinfeld,
Right.
tells, young comedians, go, well, give me the secret of your success, and Jerry goes, write a joke every day and don't break the chain.
Yeah.
So when I started something, when I want to start a new habit, so last November, I've been wanting to do yoga, and I had done it in the past. I went to the yoga studio. That was like the first yoga studio in Kansas City, probably in the mid '90s. Suzette Schultz ran it, and so I dabbled in it, but I never did a practice of it really. And then I'm just want to work on my flexibility. And so I said, I'm going to do yoga and I'm going to do 10 minutes a day minimum. So and I'm going to set it 10 minutes for 30 straight days. So I literally
Yeah.
had them on my whiteboard, which you can't see, it's over there. I had, started November 18th and I wrote November 18th all the way to December 17th or whatever 30 days was.
Start putting the big X's on there
X,
to.
X, and look at it. I could see the whiteboard every day, and I would do it. And I actually did 34 straight days. So
Nice.
it got into my mindset. And what I like too is it's not so much. I think he said not so much the number of times, or it was really the repetitions. So
Yeah,
if you did it,
it's not
yeah,
necessarily the number of days.
yeah,
It's the repetition. It's the idea of how many times you've actually done it,
yeah.
which makes a lot of sense because you've seen other literature or other books that, oh, you have to do something for X amount of
Yeah,
days.
in the 21 days is very
Right.
common. The one thing, Gary Keller's book
Yeah.
says 66 days,
Right.
right? So I liked it because he really didn't say a day. He goes, it's just the frequency of it.
Yeah.
How many
And that
times you,
and I think that makes a lot of sense that and I think it varies too. Like some things are easier to do than others, right?
right?
So, you can develop that whatever that habit is because it's really easy. It doesn't take very long. And other
Yeah.
things, it's definitely variable. Yeah, the other thing I liked about this book, one of my favorite quotes, has always been this is Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellent then is not an act but a habit.
Yes.
You know,
That's a,
it's just so compelling and it makes so much sense.
yeah. I,
John Maxwell has a similar one. You'll never change your life until you change something you do daily. The
Right.
secret of your success is found in your daily routine.
Yeah.
Again, that ultimately that's the whole vibe to this book, is that it's what you do, right?
Hmm.
If you want to be a better person a year from now, look at how you spend your time today.
Right.
And if you're doing things that you don't think are moving you forward, then you have to change those actions. You have to start doing things that are going to put you on the right path.
Yeah.
And that just makes so much sense. It's not rocket science necessarily, but it goes against the grain of kind of that hustle mentality of, oh, just, fake it till you make it. I guess there's an
Right.
element of that, but you have to actually become the kind of person that does those things.
Right.
And so to me, that's actually the most powerful part of the book, is that whole concept of identity based habits.
Yes.
So that, you can't start with the outcome. You have to actually start with being the kind of person that is going to do that.
Right.
And I love, he's got the example in there of, you walk up to two smokers and offer, a cigarette, and one of them says, "No, I'm trying to quit." And the other one says, "I'm not a smoker."
Right.
Huge difference, right? I
Yes, I
mean, we
know.
all know people that have been on those bandwagons, and the
Right.
ones that are trying to quit don't last. That's just
Yeah.
how it is.
Yeah. The goal is not to run a marathon. The
It's to
goal
be
is to
around.
become a runner.
Yeah,
And I think too, going back to like just doing it, like people ask, what's your secret to being fit? I'm like, well, my secret to being fit is, one, I've done it. I've worked out strength training wise since I was 18,
right.
and I've basically never stopped doing it. And the other thing is, I set goals for myself in terms of number of times a week that I'm working out. I love the Apple Watch because all the data's there, habit,
Right.
tracking. So
Reinforces, right.
yeah, and there's days I don't want to work out. Like I'm scheduled to work out, and I'm like, and it's easy to skip. It's easy,
It is.
but I don't know how many times I'm like, I'm just not into it. I do it, and I have one of the best workouts. It's crazy. Just half the battle of anything is just
Showing
starting
up.
it, showing
Yeah.
up. I mean, that's why he says go to the gym and turn around, or go to the gym, work out 5 minutes. Like it's just it's just half the battle. Putting your clothes out to your gym
The
clothes, your
night
workout
before.
clothes.
So
Right.
yeah, the whole concept of making it
Yeah.
as easy as you can, and your part about, just go for 5 minutes. Again, that ties in perfectly because, well, anybody could go for 5 minutes. You can't
Right.
really argue that I can't do it, or
Right.
it's some sort of big imposition.
Right.
Okay, 5 minutes. Yes, I can do that. Anybody can do that. But once you're there and you do that a few times, you're like, well, why can't I stick around for another five?
Right.
And it becomes just something that you can build on.
And today's information at everybody's fingertips, the information's out there.
Yeah,
And he says it. Don't worry about. I forget what the actual words he uses, but it's basically research. If you're researching stuff and you just
right.
keep research versus action. So
Yeah,
like you can spend a day figuring out, do I want to do this kind of strength training or Pilates or yoga or this or that, and then you're wasting time doing all the research. Just start something.
yeah.
Like actually do it. And I forget what the words he uses are, but I'm like, yeah, he's dead on.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
I had that exact conversation with a client yesterday that his tendency, and I think some of it's personality based, but this particular client of mine, his tendency is to learn everything, right? He likes to research, to your point, he likes
Right.
to analyze. And so I'd been pushing him on it, and he admitted in yesterday's meeting, he's like, you know what? I realized that I was just going to continue researching this, and instead I just started doing it.
Right.
And look at how much I got done. And he actually had achieved a lot of stuff that he'd been wanting to do. But to your point, it's because you just step in and you start doing it. It doesn't have to be perfect,
Yeah.
but you have to have a bias to action and you have to kind of build up some momentum, I think.
100%. I'll tell you a great example of for myself was this podcast. So
Mm,
I
yeah.
I had this in my mind back in 2017 to put the corporate couch on. Well, I didn't have the name at the time, but something always came out. I went through Seth Godin's podcasting workshop October of 18. I think it ended in early 2019, and I was just always had an excuse.
Yeah.
Didn't go, and I was meeting with a friend, Leslie Anderson, and it was November of 22, right before Thanksgiving. She goes, oh, what's going on? And I said, yeah, I'm doing this, that. Just trying to figure some things out. And then I still got the podcast idea. She goes, you need to do this. You need to do this. I want you to work on it this weekend. I go, Leslie, I've been working on it. I got a folder of stuff, and I have ideas. I got voice memos on my phone on what I'm going to call it. And she goes, you need to get that out there. So she literally kicked my ass, and I literally set a plan. I said, I'm going to launch by my birthday, which is January 21st. And I said, I'm going to launch, 4 episodes on January 21st. Now, I did miss by a week. I launched when the Chiefs beat the Bengals in the AFC Championship game on January 29th, but I did launch 4 episodes that Sunday, and then I launched one more Wednesday of that same week. So technically I launched 5 in 1 week,
Yeah.
and then I launched weekly since then. So, that was the habit. I knew I wanted to publish weekly, and I knew I didn't want to miss a week. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's an element of kind of you just have to break through, right? And
Yeah.
and maybe, and I think it depends on what it is, but I'm guessing the podcast might have felt like this. In your head, it feels like a big deal, or it feels like there's all the kind of overwhelming and there's all this stuff to figure out. I'm guessing after you did the first couple, you're like, oh, okay, well, I got this. I know it, yeah, I can get
Yeah.
better or I can still learn things, but it all of a sudden it becomes manageable because you've already done it.
The crazy part too, and I think this happens once you put your mind to something. I think things out there, whether you believe in God, the universe, things come to you. So like Joe, my colleague, we had worked together in 3 divisions of sprint, and then at Beringer Ingelheim. He was actually coming in town from Atlanta to spend Thanksgiving with his family. And I said, Joe, let's go to lunch. I have an idea about a podcast. I had lunch with him, and he knows me very well. And he goes, wow, I thought this was going to be a half-baked scheme of yours, but you've really given this a lot of thought. I go, yeah, I have. Are you want to partner with me? And I said, I want to make it like a talk show a little bit where we banter a little bit at the end or the beginning, And yeah, he says, I'm in. And then a friend of mine, a graphic artist, has his own design studio, helped me with the artwork. So he came up with the artwork. I mean, it just all came together very quickly, really. And then, I just asked friends to be on the show, and I didn't have a problem getting that. So yeah, it all worked out.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I guess we can talk through some of the kind of specifics, but the idea that he's broken the concept of creating habits into kind of the components of how we actually operate, how habits actually work. So the idea that habits are built around basically a fairly scientific framework, that you
Yeah.
have a cue, you have which a cue, so something that triggers you, which causes a craving, which leads to a response,
Right.
which then generates a reward.
Right.
So that feedback loop is basically how habits are formed, good and
Right.
bad. And so I really like how he made it very practical to use that framework and to break it into that, to say, okay, if you're trying to create a good habit, then you start with, one of the things you can do is you can start with the trigger, with the cue,
Right.
and make things obvious,
Yeah.
and,
Putting your
get them
gym
out front.
clothes, your workout clothes by the,
Right.
by the door, or, whatever.
I always think of this when I think of his book. I probably need to be a lot better about eating fruits. I don't mind fruit. It never crosses my mind. Well,
Right.
why not put it out in the kitchen?
Right.
Have it right there in front of
Instead
you.
of those peanut M&Ms my wife puts out in the bowl.
Exactly. And I really like the fact that he's pretty clear that, hey, this isn't about willpower, and it's not about, that you're not being strong enough. If the peanut M&Ms are out, you're going to have one at some point. It's just going to, even if you don't want to have one, it's there, you're going to eat it, because it's part of how people are wired.
Yeah.
And so the idea of breaking a bad habit, one of the things he says is to make it invisible. So
Yeah.
if you really don't want to eat the peanut M&Ms, you need to hide them, get rid of them, move them out of the way so they're not obvious.
One example he gave, which I thought was phenomenal, was how the Vietnam War veterans, when they were in Vietnam, it was some crazy high percentage were heroin addicts.
Oh yeah,
But when they came back, like 98% after 3 years were not.
because they couldn't. It wasn't nearly as easy to get, and they could
And they
move on.
weren't in, they weren't in the jungle and, the guerrilla warfare and, crazy stuff, right? I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, I just thought, and he compared that to, traditional, rehab where you go to, you know, a recovery center,
right.
Betty Ford or whatever, to Hazleton or whatever. But you're in a pristine environment. So when you come back, you start drinking again or you start doing drugs again because you go back to your same environment. So the cue and the craving, they're all there for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, and which makes sense. But I think when you're in the middle of it, or if you're really trying to change, that may not be something you'd ever thought of.
Yeah,
So if for people that haven't read the book, that may not be something that they realize, that they have put themselves in a position where it's going to be almost impossible to break a habit or to start doing something different unless they can structure the environment around them to facilitate that, either by making it obvious or making it easy. He makes a great point, kind of tied into all of that, is the whole concept of making it attractive, which is the second law, the craving, but the idea that your peer pressure, the social environment around you, does it promote what you're trying to do? Or are you hanging, so let's say if you were trying to quit smoking and every day you hang out with people that are smoking,
right,
that's a really hard thing to do, because
right.
you're gonna not be able to bring on that new identity of,
Yeah,
I'm not a smoker,
yeah,
but everyone I know is, and that's who I like to hang out with. I
yeah,
mean, that it works against you. And
right,
so, associating yourself with people who are already doing what you want to do makes
right.
perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, I have friends that they say, "Well, I only smoke when I drink." I go, "But you drink every day."
Right, right. Well, and the cue for them might be when they're in a
Right.
particular bar and they're with friends, that's the
Yeah.
trigger.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to not follow things that have already been established.
Yeah. And it's
Because
and
they're
a lot of it
craving.
too. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah,
Um, same thing. If you want to be a writer, you just have to write every day.
right.
Right, yeah, you're not going to have brilliant ideas every day. You just have to write. And even so, James Clear, went to college, played baseball. After that accident, 6 years later, he was all American, all academic American at Denison College. He was shitty writer in college, I guess. He was bad, and but he started writing his blogs and doing it daily or whatever his routine was. He became a writer because he thought of himself as a writer,
Right.
and the goal wasn't to write a book. the goal was to become a writer, and that's
Well, and back to the point you made earlier, he had a system for how he was going to go about doing that, and
right.
he was going to write, every day or whatever it
Yeah.
was, and
Yeah.
he put in all the foundation pieces that
Yeah.
enabled him to do that.
Forget about goals, focus on systems and process, right?
Which makes sense. I mean, you get back to you are what you repeatedly do. That's what we said earlier. So
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's a great book, and I love that it's tactical. But John, any additional thoughts from you in terms of Atomic Habits?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of the other ideas, and I agree with you. I think there's a lot of really practical things that somebody can put into play. But a couple of the things that he talked about that was kind of the final thoughts from him. One of them was play to your strengths. And again, that makes a lot of sense, but it might not be something that you think about if you're trying to behavior change, whatever it is. But his point was that if you're good at something, you probably enjoy doing it and it's easier to do. So it'll be a lot easier to build a habit around that. So you were talking about weightlifting earlier. I don't know if it's a strength of yours or not, but you have a lot of experience with it. So it's fairly easy for you to do. And therefore it's probably easier to build a new habit around
100%. Yeah.
and that makes a lot of sense. Another one that he talked about was beware of being the expert.
Right.
And so kind of the other end of the spectrum of, once you really get to know a subject really well, you stop thinking about it. And that's to some extent, that's the beauty of a habit, right? You don't have to think about it, but that also means you're never going to get any better.
Right.
So you kind of just have to have that awareness of now that you know how to do yoga because you were doing it for 34 days.
Well, let's not get crazy on that.
Right. But if you thought of yourself as an expert, you might not ever learn.
No, 100%.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting kind of way to think about things as well. But yeah, in general, again, like I said, I think this is one of the best books I've read in the last 10 years, just in general, but especially around behavior change. And that whole point about the identity-based piece to me is super powerful. And then, of course, all the tips and tricks of habit stacking or temptation bundling or the environment ideas, ways to actually start trying to do things differently. I think those are all really helpful. So what about you? Any takeaways for you?
I think we talked about most of them, but I think if you paired this book with 12-week year, I think you really would have a powerful combination, and possibly do 12-week year at a future one, but especially the goal thing. Don't focus on the goal.
Right.
Focus on the process. And Nick Saban, that one of the most, if not the most successful college football coach of all time. They call it the process there. You can't care about the score or what happened, the last play or what you think's going to happen, in the fourth quarter.
Go back to the fundamentals, keep doing things right.
If you're 21 points down, it doesn't matter. You got to focus on that play, the play that's coming up, and don't so the process in practice, you focus.
That's a great example. And I think about this every end of the year. So when we get to January or December and January, where people start talking about, what are they going to do for the year? What are their, that's such a poor way to go about doing it because you're focused on the goals. You're focused on the outcomes.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And that's why people fail all the time.
I'll put in the notes of the episode. We'll give out that free review, the review of the book, so they can email. We'll email that out to them. But thanks for coming on again, Sean. Have a great rest of the day.
Yep, you too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoyed the episode, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me weekly where I interview great leaders that share their career journey and their leadership wisdom.